that was really like we kicked into super high gear. And during that year, while we were kind of keeping like kind of trying to keep one foot in the when are we getting back to normal, but this was the new normal and we were okay with that.
Right.
And we had started to look at buildings in Morris, Illinois, which has two other sewing shops in town. It was like a main street, like a,
Oh, I think, did
like
you say,
like an
I
America's
think,
Main Street,
right,
kind of
right, right.
town.
Yeah, yeah,
Cute,
yeah.
cute little town. And we found a building that was for sale, and we would go and we would park out in front of it and we would get coffee and we would
And
just sit there
dream.
and dream about this building. And then so that was all of 2022, no, 2021.
Because your business has been online and driving and flying places that it's never been a brick and mortar.
No.
Right.
Mm-mm,
So,
no.
right. Okay. Continue.
So, we're looking at this building and we're thinking, well, how cool would it be to live above in the apartments above the shop and, basically run our existing business, but out of the storefront on the main floor. And while we had done a lot, we had checked that building out, we had investigated the foot traffic in the area. I mean, like we had done a lot of research and we were just about to start like really putting some serious money down,
Uh-huh. Right.
and it sold. And I mourned that building
I know that feeling.
and I did not even, I had no right to it,
No, I know. I know that feeling. I've been
but
there.
I
You're like, it's
wanted it so bad.
fine, right? It's like you dream it and
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
oh no, it's sold. Like I mean, like I cried. Charlie was really upset for me. you know. Um, and then here comes April 2022, and shows are starting to get back to normal. And a friend of mine and we decide we're going to drive down from Chicago to Paducah to see the quilt show and see if it had gotten back to its normal or close to what you could consider a normal audience.
Right.
So that maybe I could vend
Right.
at the big Paducah quilt show.
Right.
And we are
But you, but,
literally
but
driving down the street
yeah.
and we're in the downtown, cute little downtown zone, and we're driving down the street and I'm like, stop the car, stop the car, stop the car. So she pulls over and we jump out and we are staring at what is Eleanor Burns' Quilt in a Day building in
Now tell us,
downtown
for
Paducah.
those that don't know, who is Eleanor Burns and what's the significance of the Quilt in a Day building in Paducah?
Okay, so Eleanor Burns is like if we are like current quilts, famous folks, and I even say that with a lot of like, whatever, right? But if she's like the original
She's the
level
original.
of,
She's the same
yeah,
generation of, isn't she the same generation as Mary Fonz and Porter? Like it's that
Mary
whole,
Ann Fons,
right.
yeah,
So it's
Liz
all
Porter,
the that Renaissance 1976 to
yes,
78 kind of the first kind of commercialization of quilting in the like modern
yes,
late 20th century. And she is part
right.
of that big time. Does she have like, does she have a show? Like, how does
She
she get
did
known?
have a
I
show and
thought
it
she
was
did,
on
right?
PBS and it
Right,
was called Quilt in a
right,
Day
right.
because her whole shtick is that you can make a quilt
In a
tall
day.
in a day or a weekend or in this really
Right,
shortened amount of
right,
time frame, and it was accessible and easy, and she's
right.
like a rock star when it comes to like personality, and
Oh,
she's just
interesting.
infectious.
And I don't want to get off topic, but it makes me think about like who are our big people, and they were PBS people. Um,
Yes.
that's what was driving it. Fonz and Porter's on PBS, aren't they on PBS?
Yes.
Sewing with Nancy, Quilt in
Yes.
a Day. We
Quilt
get
in a
Alex
Day.
Anderson on
Alex Anderson was on
HGTV, right?
HGTV.
Right.
Yes.
So yeah. So, but this
Right.
kind of, we don't have that in this generation? We don't have the same kind of,
Well,
do we
I
have?
mean, the shows that are currently on PBS, like It's So Easy, Quilting Arts, they still have reruns of Sewing with Nancy and Fonz and Porter,
Yeah,
I think is still being
a
recorded,
thing,
but it's
right?
online
Yeah.
instead. It's not even really Fonz and
Just
Porter.
makes me think about like you and Tula Pink, like all the different people that are like the main voices at this point. It's not because they had a PBS show, right? Like it's a
No,
very interesting, it's a very internet driven, like
it's
that. It's a
yes.
very different
Yeah.
kind of business model of how you become a thing.
Yes.
And so I think that's really fascinating. Like I
I
always
think
wondered,
a lot of
you
us
know,
started with blogs.
right.
Like
And
we
YouTube
all
videos,
had
like the
blogs
YouTube world, right?
2006,
Right,
2007, and
right,
then it kind of blows up in like
right.
08, 09, 10.
Yeah,
That's
right,
when I was at the height of my blogging.
right,
And
right,
then it became social media after that.
right. It's
But,
just so interesting, isn't it? Okay,
yeah,
so Eleanor Burns,
Eleanor Burns, and I'm
she's
peering into her empty storefront. It had
what a
closed.
moment, right?
Yeah, and I am like, oh my gosh, this building is beautiful and I really want it. And I'm like right on my phone looking up how much it is and what the square footage. And I'm kind of thinking, this building needs a lot of work. And my friend Amy, who's with me, Purple Pineapple, you've had her on the
Maybe,
podcast.
yes. We have to catch up with her too.
Yeah, she said the building next door is also for sale. And so now we're peering in that building, and I am in love with this one. It's like fully completed on the first floor. Of course, I can't see anything on any other level. And so we drove home that night, back to Chicago, and I immediately called the realtor and had an appointment for the next day, and we drove back down
Back.
6 hours.
That that's not like that. Yeah, it's not a short drive, right?
No, it was a huge long distance like thing. And Charlie and we have the meeting. We are on the second and third floor, and the third floor used to be a speakeasy. And there's all these like secret rooms and secret
Really?
doors, and they're all on my Instagram and my Facebook. You can see them over there on
That's
my
so fun.
TikTok. But yeah, and I looked at Charlie and he looked at me and he's like, "You really want this one, don't you?" And I'm like, "Yep, I do." And we made a bid on the drive home, and now we live in Paducah.
That is huge. Well, the things I love about this story, first, you've always had a sense of adventure and fun. You're like one of the funnest people. And just like the idea of the willing to jump and adventure is huge. I also think it's really interesting that you found someone who is also willing to jump and play. And I wonder that, that's not always true, right? Like that, so that you're on this adventure together is really fun. I think
You
that's really
know,
amazing.
there is one thing, and I talk about this a lot, especially during the pandemic. We talked about it a lot, but I think like once my mom died in 2019, and my husband's mother and father both died within 6 months of each other. And
It changes
that
things.
that was really, really close to our big move. And I think what those things, I everybody's like, "Oh, the skull, you're like obsessed with death." It's not that. The skull is a symbol in art, and that symbol in art means memento mori, which is not like it's remember you will die, but it's really a remember to live
I
thing.
like that.
And that's what I see when I see the skulls. I see that, like, hey, that's where we're all destined to end up. And if you don't make the most of what little time we really have here, um, then what are we doing it for? you know?
Yeah.
And so we took this big jump. We bought this 123-year-old building. and it has its problems, just like a person. It's like a third person now. We call it the building. We don't live in it yet. We have an architect and they're finishing up all of our remodeling plans and demolition plans and all that kind of stuff. And then once they say it will be about a year, but about a year from now we will be living here. And
You live in
so
Paducah though. You sold everything in Chicago.
yes.
Now you live,
Oh
you're
yeah.
all
Oh
right.
my
So
gosh, we
that's the
have
dream, right? For so
so much
many
stuff.
is the idea. We went to Paducah once on our way to Chicago.
Mhm.
And that's always this kind of like this little, tell us about Paducah, because there is like for quilters, it's on the bucket list, but also there's this like dream of like, well, if we could just live in Paducah, that would be amazing.
Well, there are so many people that they talk to me and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, you're so lucky." And I'm like,
Right.
"Well, you
Right.
could live here too."
Right.
So
Exactly.
first of all, I am kicking myself in the rear end for not doing this sooner.
Really.
Yeah. Not only is just like the cost of living here cheaper, but it's just, I mean, we are 2 hours from Nashville, 2 hours from St. Louis, 5 hours from Chicago, 4 hours from Indianapolis. So not like we're not nowhere.
Right.
But we're kind of out there. So
Yeah.
Paducah is home to the American Quilter Society, and their headquarters is here. And their biggest show, the Paducah Quilt Show, AQS Paducah, is held here every year, and it is considered one of the tentpole quilt shows of the industry,
It's
just
a
like
thing.
Houston
Right.
and maybe Road to California and some of the other big shows like Lancaster.
Right.
Like, it is known as a quilt mecca.
Right.
And it has here the National Quilt Museum,
Right.
which was founded by the family that runs AQS. So, and that museum is focused on contemporary quilts, I think they said 1984 or 1985 and forward. So
Do they
there's
have,
no
I'm always wondering, do you know if do they collect as well, or
They
are
do.
they
They
do?
do. Yes, it is a
Interesting.
huge collection.
Interesting.
And like I would say like a huge percentage of it is not on display.
That's really,
So they rotate the displays really frequently, so like
yeah.
every couple of months.
Yeah.
And they always have them like overlapping each other. So one will be ending and another one will be starting, and then
Yeah.
halfway through that one, another one will start.
Right.
It's always changing. And the Quilt in a Day building, which is our neighbor building, is like a landmark in town. Everyone knows it because it's painted on the side of it, Quilt in a Day.
Right.
So what happens here every year is Quilt Week, and the whole town gets taken over by quilters, and every hotel is booked for miles, and it's just like a crazy week of quilting that happens here in Paducah, Kentucky.
And
Um,
when does that, is that that's in the spring, is that right?
it's in April. This year it's the last week of April, so like the 26th through the
So are
20th.
you gearing up? So tell us, okay, so
Oh my gosh.
you came, so tell us what's going on, and
So
I'm
God, I
excited
mean, no,
to,
it's like
yeah.
it never ends. So yeah, so we bought the building, we moved here, and the main floor of our building has like a receptionist area and then two offices. And it was, I guess at one time there were many lawyers in this building. It has never been a residence. It has always only been businesses in this building.
Interesting.
So we right away set up our video studio, which is where I'm calling you from. And then we have our office for our mail order. So now you have seen us when we have been like very consolidated and
I
you
slept
stayed in
in
my
your
house.
right. So you were very kind and took me in like in a very nice way for more time than you thought you were going to, and kind of healed me on many levels.